And she's from the University of Mississippi. Hi, I'm Julia. I'm your moderator. So don't forget to do the assessment at the end, and I'm going to pop back up and tell you to do the assessment again. Okay.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Like my lovely moderator said, my name is Kaitlyn Bulldog. I currently work at the University of Mississippi. This is my 4th professional year working at Mississippi. I am by no means an expert on assessment, I promise. I do have a background. I have an MBA, so a little bit of a non-traditional degree, which is why my interest kind of works in assessment, and why I decided that I wanted to run for chair of our assessment and curriculum committee, which is how I originally got started with all of this stuff. So that's just a little bit about me. Before we really get into like the meat and potatoes of this presentation, one, super ask questions, just like a, I don't know what you're talking about, please, please, please. Assessment's this huge, big monster, right? Like it could cover like retention and like all of this stuff. This is just like a teeny tiny like crumb that fell off the cookie of assessment about our jobs as hall directors. We need to start assessing our programs, our events. And this is because of a lot of different reasons, and I'll kind of go into these a little bit later, but I just want to remind everybody that assessment's this huge, big monster, and it's really not. Like, this presentation is supposed to break it down into a little bit of a bite-sized piece so that y'all don't have to worry about it anymore. Who here is super excited about assessment? That's what I thought. Oh, yes, there's more people than I expected. I expected crickets. You know, Jiminy's sitting in the back being like, yeah, me. All right, so we're just gonna dive right in. I thought this quote was super, super perfect for this particular, my thought, my philosophy on assessment and events. So tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. That is one of the things that I think is like super relevant to assessment because that's why we do these events. We don't throw alcohol awareness workshops because we want them to remember and spit out that data. We want them to learn and change the behavior. If anybody has been to the social justice one, like the presentation literally in this room right before this, she did a phenomenal piece on like you have to be learning from it and you don't learn unless you're actually in it and can apply it. So this is us trying to get our students into that active learning phase, which helps them remember a lot better than, yes, 1.5 fluid ounces is the standard measure of a shot. Repeat back. Got it? Perfect. All right, so obviously it wouldn't be anything assessment related if we didn't have learning outcomes. So first we're going to refine your learning outcomes for a more targeted assessment. I recognize that institutions have learning outcomes. My particular institution calls the smaller ones that we create learning goals. So if I say learning goals, that's what I mean. It is a learning outcome, but we have 2 levels. We have our curriculum level, and then we have our building or event level. So that's a little bit of a background about us. This is based off of the University of Mississippi model of curriculum, and we use like a residential curriculum. So I apologize if you use like a programmatic model. This is going to be a little bit more geared toward that, but you can always create your own learning outcomes. It's not that difficult to do with a programming model. We're going to craft effective assessment strategies to support those learning outcomes that we have already refined. We will then dissect and experiment with an assessment first model, and I'll walk you through what that exactly looks like, and explore different assessment strategies to utilize for event planning. With me so far? All right, first things first, you have to decide on what you want to present on. So like I said, I work with a curricular model, which basically tells me, Caitlyn, this is your learning outcome for the month of September. Actually, it technically gives me 3, 1 for an event and 2 for passive educational opportunities, which we do not have time to cover. So I get to go in and decide which one I want to work with. And so there are some factors to consider. Building population is one that I really enjoy considering because you can't do it. Like I have 3 all-male residence halls. That's right, I said it, I'll say it again. 3 all-male freshman residence halls with 1 floor of upperclassmen. I am not going to do a femininity workshop on how to embrace your femininity because that's not exactly my population. Now, there's a presentation like next session that's, or tomorrow that's on like masculinity. I'm gonna be all over that. But you have to really consider your students. I encourage you to push the boundaries with your students because while they may not identify with those types of things like femininity, that is always something to push them on as well, but you have to be ready because your students need to be open to whatever kind of Kool-Aid you're trying to give them. Accessibility pretty much goes without saying. Please make sure that your events are accessible to everybody. I cannot use a very specific area of my building because there are stairs leading up to it and no elevator. So I can't use that area because it's not the most accessible place. Think about that, but you also want to consider other types of disability. So for example, I have done events around identity, focusing on breaking down musical lyrics. So to make that more accessible to those who may not have the best hearing, we also had like the lyrics playing kind of like karaoke style so that they could read along. But that is something that you want to consider. Timing of event. If something major is happening on your campus, you might want to strike while the iron's hot. Everybody's kind of heard of that before. The University of Mississippi had a couple of really interesting debates and processes happening on campus last year. So we did some programming around that, some event planning around that so that our students can communicate their feelings because we all know our students like to be heard, right? They like to give their opinions. Policy violations, I had a ton of alcohol policy violations in the fall, ton. And we have significantly less in the spring, mostly because our students just get a little bit smarter with it. But not this year, but last year, I went from 3 a week to 1 a week right after my event. There's a really phenomenal assessment presentation by Ivan before. Causation does not mean correlation. That does not mean that my event did that, but it definitely didn't hurt because the number of incidents did not go up. Trending interest, if your students have a particular interest, go for it. Like we have an esports club that is like taking my buildings by storm. If we can, again, that accessibility stuff, getting TV set up, do something that they want to be a part of. Yes, again, push the boundaries, try to get them outside of their comfort zone, but an easy way to start this semester is by getting them into the idea of programming with, this is something I want to be a part of. Then they'll start thinking about moving through and kind of being like, not my style, like not my thing, but I'm going to go do this. Days, months of recognition, if you have, there are tons and tons of these that I can't even mention. One that comes to mind is like ice cream cone day, awesome. But any of those are really wonderful. Just make sure that you have the very correct date because sometimes they change year to year. And finally, conversations with students. How many people talk to their students regularly? Same. I regularly sit in my office and students will come in and sit down and say, hey, Caitlyn, and we will go off on some topic. And I'm just sitting there and they're just talking about it, right? If enough of them come in and want to talk safe sex practices, yeah, go ahead. Do it, do the thing, especially because it's on their mind and it's relevant to them. Ready? Questions, comments, concerns? Anybody else have any ideas or what they think about when they're starting that process of event planning that I haven't already mentioned? No? Yes? No? Okay. Fair enough. All right, so that's basic, what are we gonna do the event on? Where we get our inspiration. We're gonna go into learning outcomes. Sorry if some of you have already seen some of this stuff. Basically, first you wanna do, what do you want your participants to learn? And then be specific. You don't wanna say, I want my students to learn about safe sex practices. What specifically do you want them to learn? I'll be referencing a couple of very specific events throughout this. Number one is probably gonna be happy hour, it's my baby. Happy hour is an event that basically, the learning outcomes will be listed later, but I want my students to know, students will be able to identify and pour a standard measure of drink for wine, beer, and liquor. All three. Perfect, done. Might want to handle one at a time, but I'm super extra all the time. Use strong action verbs. I would also recommend not going super far out of your wheelhouse with your vocabulary. Yes, I'm not that person. My favorite words to use are navigate, love it. But I'm definitely not going to be matriculate, ruminate, those aren't words that I enjoy using. And I think that my students, my staff really have a hard time understanding when I try to explain to them what we're trying to get at. So I try not to do that. If you want to, you can always do a supervisor version and your student staff version, but be prepared to dumb down that language for your students, just because not everybody wants to go into higher education. The students that we work with, computer science majors, political science majors, graphic designers, they're not interested in doing that. So I encourage you to push the boundary in your own way and find the word that works for you. But again, navigate's my absolute favorite because I know what it means, my students know what it means, we all know what it means, but it still sounds fancy. Use words that are easily measurable. I try to stay away from two very dangerous words when it comes to Bloom's taxonomy. Can anybody guess what they are? What was it? Boom, number one, understand. How do you gauge that someone understands a topic? That one I was expecting Jiminy Cricket for. It's really hard to do that because understand could mean I have a basic fundamental knowledge, or I could tell you a 5-page paper on this particular topic. So understand is a word that I try to stay away from. Is there anybody else or any other words that people try to stay away from? Aware, yes, definitely. You can make them aware, but where does that kind of stop? Anybody else? The last one I try not to do is learn. Students will learn how to, put on a condom. That one's kind of easy, but students will learn what it means, like what the idea of social justice is. How do you gauge that? What do you do to measure that they have learned the idea of social justice? Yes, well, they'll become aware of that. They'll know that it exists in this world. But if they're sitting there and they're super engaged and they're writing notes like all of you, yes, probably learning. If they're sitting there and they're on their phones, they're not paying attention, they're not even engaged, how do you gauge the difference? Because they both heard that word, but there's two totally different types of students involved. And then Bloom's taxonomy. Is everybody familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? Yes, good. Seeing some assessment, some basic assessment, yes. We're gonna go over that type of assessment later. Bloom's taxonomy is really wonderful. Again, I don't have a student development background, so when I got this 2 years ago, my whole world changed. It was really wonderful, so I use that a lot. So again, students will be able to is what you'll be starting with, and then you can use the various types. This is not the one that I prefer, but it is the one that is prettiest. There are different stages depending on which type of Bloom's taxonomy you use, and I say type because there's an older version that I use because I like it in the way that it breaks down because it works for my brain. This one's much more visual, so again, it's up to you. At the end of the day, words are words. If it works for you, it works. At the end of the day, that's all you're trying to get is a word that fits what you need it to do. So again, there's remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Basically, how far into the synthesis are you trying to get? Like, are we doing basic awareness? Are we gonna be doing like recitation? Are we actually gonna utilize those skills? That type of stuff. This is what I mean. This is my preferred version of this, not nearly as pretty. I recognize it. But I like this one just because it breaks it down. Again, this is the exact piece of paper. I write, don't put learn or know right here. And then over here, I write navigate, locate, that type of stuff. Wonderful. Different types of assessment. This is a lot of what I really wanted to get into. So we have formal assessment and we have informal assessment. Spoiler alert, that's the next slide. Formal assessment touches tangible assessments, things like surveys and systems. So I say systems because you can use eRes Life to pull particular items. How many students are a part of one of my living learning communities? Easy, easy stuff. How many people are part of this club or organization? If you have something like OrbSync, or we call it Forum, that is easy to pull data. These are things that you can find super easy without bothering anybody. It's like, you know, when you go into your roommate's room, you don't have to wake them up to get the answer because you have it somewhere. You just have to look for it. Surveys are also tangible because you can literally just print them off and be like, here, supervisor, here are my tangibles. A lot of people like to do surveys. If you do surveys at an event, I caution you to do very few questions because who wants to sit here after this particular session and fill out the 7-question one that we have to do, right? We are all here to learn something, and there is an assessment after this that is 7 questions. That's a lot for me too. As an assessment person, I will do them. But it is what it is, man. Those are tangible because those literally get sent to people. They will then use that data to decide, do we want to do more assessment type presentations because they're amazing and Caitlyn's phenomenal? Do we want to do more social justice because there was a huge interest in that and the number of people was higher? Quizzes, you can do that to measure like the learning. Have we gotten to those things? Can they select the right answer? Intentional interactions, is everybody familiar with that particular term? For those of you who are shy, like my colleague, intentional interactions is having conversations with your students. And so if you do an event that's focused around healthy relationships and your CAs or your RAs talk to your students later, did they grasp the concepts? Do they understand? Have they been applying it? Even something as simple as like, what do you think? How did you like interpret that? You know, did it resonate with you? Those types of things. Reflection. This is where you can get a lot of qualitative data, a little bit harder to grab, and by grab, I mean getting students to sit down and actually have a real serious conversation in their own mind and say, what did I learn from this experience? And finally, 3-2-1 questionnaires. This is very, very specific, but it's like 3 things that you learn, 2 major concepts, and the 1 thing that you're going to take away. Kind of questions on that to make it a little bit interesting. If you're going to do tangible formal assessments, I encourage you to try to make them fun. So if, like one of the ones that I was really interested in doing, we did a phenomenal diversity workshop, which basically made you, like, listed your various identities, not like specific, like male and female, it specifically said gender. And we had to put, you know, this is, like, I specifically identify with this gender, or this identity the strongest. And they put a sticky note, I would put a sticky note on, like, gender, as a, like, I really strongly identify as a woman, before, like, my religion, my ethnicity, that kind of stuff. That is something fun and tangible that's a little bit different. Again, be just very aware of how public your students are going to want to make those proclamations if you do something like that. But that assessment is done for you. The students have literally picked up the sticky note that says, I most identify with my religious views, my socioeconomic class, my family status, those types of things. These are some more formal types of assessment. Anybody have any other formal types of assessment that they utilize? Okay. All right. The informal assessment, that's my favorite. I live in activities. All of my events are activity-based because it's more fun that way. And fun equals participation equals assessment. So I will go into a little bit about this later, but basically, like I said, create an activity that in itself is assessment. And I know that's really conceptual at this point. But again, just everybody remember I was talking about happy hour. I want my students to be able to pour me a shot of liquor effectively. Guess what we did at that event? There it is. That is exactly what I'm talking about. And you know what? They loved it. We played music. We had, like, solo cups. They had a competition. So like I said, freshman men, do you think they over-poured, under-poured, or were kind of right on par with that? Over? I'm hearing a lot of over. They were right on the money. 55% of them poured it absolutely wrong the second time. The first time, it was like 75% were correct. And, like, granted, fluid ounces is like, but I'm not talking like a double shot. There were a couple guys that were like, yes, so I knew from that assessment that my guys knew how much was too much. They just didn't care. So I was like, here, pour me a shot. So they would, like, go like that, and they would have 1 shot. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. Pour me what you would pour at a party. That number went way up. So again, like, I wanted to know that my students knew how to pour their drinks, and it was really surprising. It was super surprising to me, because I made the same assumption. Freshman men, they're going to overpour themselves. Not true. Games are fun. Who likes to play Kahoot? They make everything a little bit more exciting, right? I completely agree. I'm a huge competition person. Last year, I had a floor wars, and they got points by winning my curriculum events that they didn't know were curriculum events, and I got tons of participation, which was a lot of fun. So I encourage you to use that if your students are open to it. Not everybody's super competitive like me, where I have to be better and my blazer has to match my presentation. Like, not everybody is that extra. Again, ooh, I'm extra. Oh, you didn't notice? Weird. But yes, not everybody is that extra. So find out what your students are. And if you really have a hard time with that, just ask them. Like, literally ask them what they want to see. Yes, they may come. Yes, they may not. Talk to your CAs, because they get a little bit more of a genuine view of who your students are. That might be a little bit more comfortable from you. Being female, like my students, they like to sugarcoat everything a little bit for me. So I'll talk to my male CAs and say, what are we actually talking about? What's actually going on here? Asking questions, kind of already covered that. Students explaining concepts back to you is a really phenomenal way to do this. If I explain the idea of social justice, kind of going along with that activity, can they reverberate it back without being like, social justice is being nice to everyone? Not quite. But we're going there. So then that can kind of show you that you need a little bit more assessment. These are kind of like informal because they're really hard, like conversations are kind of hard to gauge. Because it's really hard to say, yes, Jillian hit 3 of the 4 learning outcomes we had. First of all, that's way too many for an event, so sorry. You should have like 1 or 2 learning outcomes for an event. 1 or 2. 3 is a lot. 4 is way too much for a 1-hour presentation, but we're gonna go for it because I'm ambitious and competitive and push myself to that edge. Survey jars are kind of cool. This is a very specific answer. If you have a front desk at your building, you put like a bowl of marbles in the center, and then you can put on one jar, a straw has 2 holes and a straw has 1 hole, and students can simply pick up a marble and drop it into the jar that they feel is accurate. Spoiler alert, straws have 1 giant hole, in my own opinion. But again, it's something like that. That's something easy. You know, do you think NFL is better than college football? I definitely don't agree with my students on that. I'm all about NFL, but my students, I mean, we're in the SEC, right? College football is a big deal. So I would definitely be on the smaller marble side. But these are really small things that maybe don't translate, but you can turn them into data. So how do you turn that into data? Count your marbles, literally. I mean, don't lose your marbles, but count the marbles. Also utilize your student staff. If you have a desk staff, we have 24-hour desks. Simple things like, can you please count the marbles that are in this jar? Please stop collecting. We're done with that survey. How many people to how many people, and then you can get the total of who participated. Something simple as that, because informal data is something that you kind of have to work for. We made it easy for our students, and therefore we kind of have to do a little bit more work. Formal assessment spits it out. You can manipulate it. It's wonderful. But again, this is the informal stuff. In my experience, I have a little bit more success with informal because my students really don't want to do a survey. I literally put like QR codes to surveys on the inside of the door stall so that they sit there and do it, because I know they're not doing anything else. That's really, really hard to do. I don't know. Personal, you know, that's their business. I'm applying the concept and skills. Again, my happy hour thing, I actually made them like apply the skill. If we're teaching them how to do long division or calculus 5, bold, can they solve a problem? Simple as that. Can they take what they learned from this event and use it to solve something different? Any questions on any of these? Yes, sir.
So with the survey jars, I really like that idea.
Okay.
Is it like a one per person? Is it like,
Yeah.
you know, we have like the problem students that just grab a handful and just throw them all in?
Yes, there are some things that you can do to monitor that. Ooh, I want to get closer to you, but there's literally a light barrier. So what you can do is you can leave the jar like by your front desk, and they can kind of monitor that, which is what I utilize. If someone decides to like reach in and grab a jar, yes, they can throw it in there and it'll be awful, and your front desk staff member can try to figure that out. Or you can simply have the jar of marbles on one side, or one thing that I like is like the basketball game where they have to kind of like, you know, I think it's 1 hole or 2 holes, I'm gonna try and shoot it, I miss, the staff member picks it up and puts it in the basket, so it kind of counts, but it provides enough separation that they can't mess it up. Also, if you wanna get really, really specific, because your kids are that creative with trying to mess up your surveys, pick a specific color. Like pick orange and draw like lines on them so that they're not gonna just have orange paper in their backpack and dump a whole bunch of orange crumpled up pieces of paper. And I suggest that you get that creative with it, because again, if it looks fun, they're gonna wanna participate. If you want to see, you know, if, how many people's like career or activity center has one of those wheels that you can like spin, it has the dials and it goes, yeah, that. And they're whiteboards now, right? Like you can write stuff on it. Use that. That looks like fun, right? If you have like little giveaways, like have that available, entice them to be a part of this survey. It doesn't even have to be about your events. It could be like you can ask like questions like, how can we improve our building? If you spin it and that's what it lands on, you get like a phone wallet. Something simple as that, like, because if you make it exciting and they want to participate, you're gonna get way more answers. Kind of like survey size. Who wants to fill out the EBI or like the Sky Factor 145, right? There's a reason why there's an iPad at the end, because it's hard. We just recently moved, talking about assessment more than events, we just moved to a recent model of a quarterly survey instead of one giant one at the end of the year. So we do anywhere from like 7 to 10 questions quarterly. So we get that a little bit better, because we're now training those freshmen. The survey is not gonna take forever. It's 1 page, and it literally says it, 1 page. Long 1 page, but at the end of the day, they like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, done. We try to keep them pretty easy. But again, and don't ask for information you already have. I cannot stress that enough. Like, my least favorite question on like a survey is like, are you a boy or a girl? it's fine, I understand. If your institutions have like those kind of logins where it kind of pulls who you are, wonderful. Sometimes you do have to ask that demographic. I do. I hate asking what building do you live in, because I really just want you to say mine and nobody else's, because my students are the best. Super competitive with that too. I had 35% of my students fill out the quarterly survey last year, and I told everybody because the next highest was 22. This is what I'm talking about, but that's what I do. You have to think about where to meet your students. Like I said, I met my student, well, I didn't meet my students, but the survey met my students in the bathrooms, and like on the mirrors of the bathrooms and on the inside of the bathroom stall. Like, these are places that you have to think about, because guess what? Okay, I need someone to fill out a survey. Where can I put it that they're doing nothing? Where they're trapped in a space for a couple of minutes and have nothing to do. You can put it on their door. You can incorporate it into door decorations. Some people do that. One thing that was really cool was one of our students did a passive educational opportunity. They did a door hanger that said, like, what's my favorite TV show, and they left it there so students could fill it out. One, you could collect that, or two, you can leave it up so that other students can be like, hey, my favorite show is Game of Thrones too, even though it's the worst last season of any show ever. But thank you for asking that question. Anybody else? Wonderful. Okay. This is like my whole little small soapbox, so allow me to step onto it. Why attendance can be problematic. I said can be, because who likes to show administration they had 100 people come to an event? Me, super competitive. All my events are the best because the most people come, right? Not always true. Operational data versus experiential data. Did the event happen? Operational data, check box. Food was bought, food was purchased, eaten, consumed, it happened. Experiential data. Can you tell if a student took your learning outcome away from an event by an attendance sheet? No. Again, it's very check the box. I do not think this is problematic at all. I think it's super helpful, especially if you have one of those systems that kind of follows your student around and marks what events they go to, so you can start doing some mapping with that. So if you have one of those systems, which we very candidly but if you have one of those systems, you can be like, wow, Colton loves to go to assessment programs because they're great and awesome. Wonderful. Do more of those types of programs or events. Student learning versus perceived institutional data. Who has so much money that they can do whatever they want with it? That's what I thought. How many of you hand in receipts with attendance sheets? Yeah. Do you, like, how do you think administration reacts? And administration, I mean like associate directors, directors, assistant directors, whoever you hand your receipts to. If you spent $200 on an event that 3 people came to, how does that feel? Right, because we put out this huge amount of money, but the other problem is, what if that $200 went to buying textbooks because those students could not afford it? Those students can effectively finish their classes now because you did that. That's not measured by attendance. There are lots of other things that aren't measured by attendance. Student learning is a huge deal. If that $200 went towards continued alcohol education over the course of a month and a half, you're not gonna learn from that attendance sheet that those students, like, it changed their life because they were really using alcohol to cope, and we got them off of that before it became an addictive behavior. It's really hard to show those types of things. My last part of this soapbox is it's really highly dependent on various factors. Marketing, did you market the event? Did you market it well? Did you market it far enough in advance? Was the marketing eye-catching? Did you use multiple platforms? I could go on for days on this particular piece alone, again, because I have an MBA and this is what I love to do. Is it obnoxious? Yes. Is it things that think about? Of course. Competition. Has anybody ever competed with a fraternity or sorority date party? How did you do? Think about it. Monday nights, right. Monday nights for us is chapter night. And I did an event on Monday. Abysmal attendance. I had students coming through, but I didn't have a lot. It was all my non-Greek students, and so I missed a part of my population. I have like 40 to 60% of my students are Greek, depending on the year. So I missed a huge population, and so therefore that group has now been negatively impacted because of the time of this event. Did they want to come? Maybe. Did they have the opportunity to? Absolutely not. Interest level, again, I go back to like, reaching your inner child as an event. My guys are probably not going to want to go to that. because they're tough and cool and nothing bothers them. Not exactly what they're into, but we can mess up some 2K. They love that, like anything like that. And then finally, student commitments. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about with competition. But again, you have to be really selective of your time. If you have like a common hour, that's a really good opportunity. If you have a lot of my students are in, we call it BCal or like business calculus or something like that. I don't know what it's called, but it's BCal. They all have that Tuesday nights and Thursday nights because it's the same night from 6 to 9. Super not helpful because that's when I want to do my events. So I have to kind of move it around to fit their schedule. Make sense? Definitely make sure it's accessible. Any questions about my soapbox? Love it. So finally, like the meat and potatoes, now that we're pretty much into it, that was all scope. Here we go. Assessment first modeling. Again, I will preface this by saying we at the University of Mississippi utilize a residential curriculum model. I have to hit at least one of 3 specific learning outcomes a month with an event. Okay. So first, you're going to identify that learning outcome that you're going to utilize for that month. Then you're going to decide on what you personally want to focus on. What do you think is important? It's February. What has not been hit by your students? What are they screaming for? Are they asking for something specific? Craft your assessment strategy. How are you going to measure what you want your students to learn in a fun way? And finally, create a method or activity to fulfill that assessment. So, what do I have to hit? What do I want? I'm getting ahead of myself. How am I going to prove that they are learning, or how am I going to show that they did or did not learn? And then finally, create a method or activity to fulfill your assessment. I'm going to switch sides because I'm in everybody's way. So here's a different way to think about it. Kind of a line. I'm going to back up so you guys can really take your pictures. What are the parameters? What do I have to do in this event? Some people have other requirements based on their models. Oh, yeah. Some people have like other requirements that their schools require of them, and I'm sure that this is kind of reverberating with you when you're thinking about your institutions. What do you want to accomplish? And by you, I do not mean me, Kaitlyn Bulldog. I think this is the most important. I mean you in the mindset of your students. What do my kids need? What do my students want? I say kids because it's out of love and affection, I'll be honest. They're all my children, except when I hate them. Write the learning outcomes and be specific. Do not try to accomplish the world because it's not going to happen. And that's okay. One country will do. It's fine. Get it? Conquer the world, country. How can you assess that outcome? How can it be active learning? How can they actively be a participant in this learning? And an event that assesses itself just kind of creates itself. All right, so these are some of the events that I personally have done. My learning outcome was recognize and explain how actions affect others. This is August. What did I want my freshman men who just got to campus to learn? Lots and lots of things. I had one thing to accomplish. I really wanted them to learn the university campus. We get a lot of out-of-state students. They probably don't know where Shoemaker is because it's behind like 5 trees and the sign fell off and you can't find it anywhere. So my assessment was, can students successfully find various locations on campus? And I picked locations that freshmen need. Martindale is where like SDS, admissions, financial services, Bursar, that is like the building for us, right? Can students successfully find the locations on campus? Guess what we did? We did the Ole Amazing Race. And students literally stank because they ran to all these locations. This is the 5th floor. They were the red team, obviously. And what they are doing right now is they successfully have found the Union, which is where all the food is on campus, and they're currently organizing the Hotty Toddy chant by word. That is not the learning piece. The learning piece is that they have made it to the Union. They know where it is. I had a CA place there. There were 6 CAs across campus. And so this CA gave them activity so that it wasn't just running from location to location, checking the box and moving on. So we had some Ole Miss themed stuff, again, to make them feel, I've made it. This is college. So they did the Hotty Toddy chant, and they were simply supposed to say the chant. Then somebody came up to me later and they're like, yeah, people have been screaming the chant at the Union all day. And I was like, oh, that's awkward. Why would they do that? And they really enjoyed it to the point that I messed it up a little bit and kind of got my wires crossed and sent one place, like 2 different floors to 2 different buildings, or the same building 2 times, different buildings. So they actually raced up the hill behind my building to decide who won. This event was really great because this started that whole, like my whole portfolio. This brought them in. This was week 1. So they weren't at that place yet where they're like, events are boring. Like, I don't do that. They loved it. But again, can they successfully find the locations? They physically showed up. Yes. This is September. Explore and evaluate personal goals and needs. I have been talking about this one a lot, so it's not surprising that my community focus was then alcohol education. I need my men to come back okay. Not okay, but okay. My assessment, do students know the standard measure of alcohol? Can students pour a standard measured drink without measuring? There's a lot of measure in that one. Couldn't really put it into words in a nice, eloquent way. So what happened? Happy hour happened. We had other events, but the main focus of the event, or we had other activities, the main focus of the event was the solo cups that they're holding right now. Can they successfully pour it? We utilized grenadine and lime juice for our liquor, and they could mix it with Coke or Sprite or whatever they wanted, but essentially that's what we used to measure. We had 3 cups lined up behind the table. One was measured for shot pouring, one was beer pouring, and one was wine pouring, because we had all 3 fake beverages. And we just used that as our comparison. And they really enjoyed it. We played, like I said, we played music. He is wearing drunk goggles. You can see it. I can't point to him, but this one right here, is wearing drunk goggles, and you can kind of see the tape on the floor. We had that. We had like drunk RV driving. So these are the fun things. So they had like a little RV car, and we drew like a little map on the ground, and they were like, oh, I can't see. It was really cute. But this is fun. If you walk into a building and there's music playing and people are standing around holding red Solo cups, that kind of looks like fun. So maybe you'll pour a drink. It also doesn't involve a lot of involvement. Like, I can get a drink and I can go, and I still get the assessment piece. I want them to stay, I want them to talk and do the BAC calculator that we also had. But they stood there and they did the assessment, right? All right, I think this is my last one. Demonstrate ability to engage in civil discourse with someone with other beliefs. These are generally a little vague so that you can make some different decisions on what you want to focus on. I wanted to focus on critical thinking and conflict mediation because I hate it when people argue and it's the worst, and I want to make sure that nobody's being like, no, you're just dumb. That's just not helpful. So how does it feel like when you're not being heard, and how do students react when they get frustrated? This is what I wanted to focus on in the reference and the frame of mind of critical thinking and conflict mediation as one unit. So we did Escape the Lounge. That's Nico. He's one of my CAs. We did Escape the Lounge. We put them in a high-stress situation in which they had to get out, and they were actively in competition with each other. So every floor was clocked, and the quickest time was like 15 minutes, and the longest time was after I wanted to go home. But that's exactly what it was. It was a critical thinking workshop where I purposely made it hard to do. And what we did as our assessment piece was there was a CA in the room, not the CA of the floor, because we don't want that. It has to be unbiased. But we had a CA in the floor who had already gone through. We did like a conflict management kind of workshop before this, some basic points. And what we did was there's a CA in the room, and they counted how many times somebody said something unhelpful. That's stupid. That's not going to work. You're dumb. Like stuff like that. That's not helpful. And so they actually got docked. Well, not docked, but like time got added to their times because of that behavior. So it made them stop actively. So I could see it. Like, I watched my CAs do it. This is my staff. I watched them do it, and I could see the steam coming out of their ears because they were like, that's not helpful. I don't think that's correct. Like, that kind of stuff. And it really pushed them. And like I said, this is stuff that like involves them. They want to be a part of this. It's fun. It's not, how does it feel when you're not heard? Yes, I asked that question at the end, but there was context to it. They knew, because when I was doing this, I stepped to the side. You can see the overturned couch right here, because they thought I was real extra and put it in the couch. You know, I told you it wasn't under the couch. How did it feel like when you weren't heard? Did you enjoy moving the couch because there was no reason to? It seems silly, and it's really basic assessment. Again, this is not advanced level stuff. None of this is supposed to be advanced, sorry. But again, that is the assessment piece. Oh no, too far. Or I just copied the wrong version. Sorry, so we're gonna do this the old school way and make do with what we have. So we're gonna do an activity because, no, nothing's fun without a little activity. So what I want you to do is I want you to grab a partner, and you guys are going to create an event that is not mine and use this particular learning outcome. So I want to know, work with your partners and take about 5 minutes to decide on a community focus. If it is dependent on a month, please let us know in advance. Just be like, hey, we decided we were gonna do a September event and our community focus is X. And then please tell us what your assessment is going to be and what that activity looks like. So everybody pair up, and I will give you 5 minutes to do that. Yes. Hi. What's up? Yes, so the next step, so the learning outcome, and then you decide on what your community focus is going to be, what you want your students to learn, and then your assessment incorporated event. Okay? Yeah. This is part of our curriculum.
So, when you're thinking about this, how do you recognize and explain how others, is that part of a social justice?
No, it's just that is the learning outcome that we have. We have engaged scholars and engaged scholars and
So basically, we don't have to take this from to a social justice.
no, and the point of this activity is to show that it's going to be different.
Great.
So you guys are going to come up with something very, very different than something else. So because so many things can, and that's why I picked this one, and that's why I had to go back 55 slides, was because this particular one can be so different.
Yeah.
For me, it was alcohol. It could also be sex education. That's the point of it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, I don't know how you.
All right. So, remember that we're going to go over learning outcomes, and then we're going to talk about, just tell me your community focus. If it's time dependent, please do let us know that. And then what your assessment is and how that you turned it into an event. Cool? Anybody who wants to talk? What did y'all come up with? I'm excited to hear it. Yes.
Actually, discussed the idea of wanting our students to know who they're living with.
Okay.
Remediation and that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
probably in September, late August or September.
Sure.
And our assessment question was, can you define or describe your learning expectations? So, something that will be mood blinking, or something
Yes.
that you kind of learn oh, is this something that's hot or cold, or they're an expert, I'm an introvert, and then what does that mean for their expectations?
That is phenomenal. Oh my God, like bowing down. Like that's so good. Talking about roommate expectations is so important because how many people have roommate conflicts? Wow, you guys all have roommates? That's weird. Yes, all of our students do this, especially freshmen who have to live with other people. Because enrollment's going down, that's like people can privatize and do all that stuff, but that is a huge piece. If you hit that early on in a fun way where it's like, yeah, I know that Ashley, you said your partner was Ashley, I know that Ashley likes it at 65 degrees, but I'm more of a 72 type of person. That is something that you guys can field in advance. I love it. That was phenomenal. Anybody else? Yes, and we'll come to you after that.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So my partner Danielle and I, we talked about the flu season.
Yes.
So thinking about how obviously when we live in a residence hall, that is affecting others.
Right.
So if you're sick and you touch something, that can impact others. So we thought about asking our students to reflect maybe once you've walked out of the building and we're standing out there, how many door handles have you touched? And thinking about that, and then maybe providing them with like hand sanitizer, or providing them with like the health and wellness resources of like, here's common facts about flu season, or like maybe here's some information about free flu shots on campus, or X, Y, and Z. But just helping them to reflect upon the fact of like this is going around, and this can be easily spread just by physically like sneezing in your hand, and then like you touch your roommate's door, bathroom door, your front door, blah, 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 all that fun stuff.
That is phenomenal. We always have that problem on campus because we have like old buildings and everybody's like, I'm sick because of the building. The building is making me ill. I need to move to the nicest building on campus for no additional charge. Everybody's heard it though, right? Phenomenal. Great idea. Awesome, awesome, awesome.
Yes, so me and Miguel, our community focus was looking at the influence of those actions and interacting with diverse others,
Okay.
or just people different than me.
Right.
So how we're going to do that is through a game like Yankee Swap. So like I'm in the office, like Michael's right, yeah. So like Dirty Santa, if you ever play Dirty Santa, how we're going to do that is just observing how like if we have a label, a color might represent like this is your roommate, this is the person down the hall, and so like I may have a pair of socks, you may have an iPad, but asking questions at the end of, oh, I took the iPad without even thinking twice and not paying attention to the fact that that was my roommate, and asking questions of like, well, like was it easy to do that? Did you think twice about that, or was it just kind of like this iPad or nothing? So like I don't know if we're on that track, but like that's what we're.
No, that's perfect. And I'm so glad that the three groups that did talk did, because you guys kind of all did something for me. I don't really ask questions I don't want, like that I don't already know the answer to. How many of those were exactly the same? None? Each one was beautiful and unique in its own way, which is why I like it's great that like the learning outcome is this, but you can pick so many different things. And so like this is off of our first year plan. I work with freshmen, that's no surprise I'm on the first year plan. So y'all talked about roommate agreements, and you like set the assessment of like, wow, I didn't know that about my roommate, or like that kind of thing. You assess like how compatible they were in essence. Y'all talked about, do you even think about the things that you're touching and putting in your mouth? I had a student put a Tide Pod, like not like in his mouth, but like try to open it because he thought it wouldn't dissolve in cold water. So dumb. Sorry, super tangent. And then y'all decided to talk about what is value to a person, and like did you think about like literally asking and assessing, did you think about that impact, which is so phenomenal. And you all did have your pieces in there. A little bit of refining on your assessment side where you're going to some of that data or how you're going to report that up, but I didn't exactly ask you to do an assessment question, so guess what we're going to do now? We're going to use explore and evaluate personal goals and needs. I want your assessment question, like your community focus, your assessment question, and then the event. Just a little extra step this time. Community focus, assessment question, event. right. So, my last group did such a good job that I'm not going to pick them. Sorry, loves. But you get the beautiful takeaway of a whole nother event. So, any new groups, can you give me your community focus, your assessment questions, and the event itself? In the back. Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love it. It's perfect. Very good. I like that a lot. Anybody else? One more? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's so cool. That's really fun. That's really different, right? Really hard if you're on the second floor. But that's the fun part to it. They literally be like, okay, and go. I love it. One thing that all 5 of these brand new events that are like starkly new, fresh, hot off the presses, covered, like, you know, starchy, nice, is that there's one thing in common that I really, really love, and none of you involved food. Did you notice that? None of you involved bringing people in with food. Granted, yes, you can absolutely have food available, like you're handing out some things. And the one thing that I kind of want to like wrap up and put a pretty giant little bow on is that these are not, like none of you are using a lot of financial components. You're talking about making bingo cards from scratch. That's like an Excel file, all about that. Really here for it. Y'all are passing out like hand sanitizers. If you already have those, like great, they're on hand. And you know what? It's even better. It's marketed. It says student housing or res learning or whatever. That's great. None of you really utilized food. And I challenge you to not. Because what I get is I get students that come in, get the pizza, and they go upstairs. Kind of like some of us have heard that in other presentations. These are sitting down and engaging and talking to your students, talking to your RAs on their elevator, you know, just like asking those hard questions. Did you count, like, how many surfaces you touch in? What does your roommate expect of you? Phenomenal. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions? Is there anything that I didn't cover, maybe that some of you still have some questions about? Yes.
So I've been thinking a lot about accessibility.
Okay.
What you're saying about where to do your space.
Yes.
But I'm thinking about how you do the old learning experience and how that was a lot of movement and running. So how would you engage the students if they couldn't participate physically but still?
Absolutely. That was very early on, and no, it was not accessible. So what we ended up doing was kind of having them kind of come along on a phone, FaceTime. So they could stay here with me, didn't count because I had to come back to the building, but they could stay with me and be on FaceTime and be a part of that conversation so that they were still there. And so like, yes, the Ole Miss chant, like they can say like, hell yeah, damn right, and like say it out loud so they can organize it. We also did an alumni organizing activity. So the knowledge piece is still there, but physically, like I'll call you when we get to the next place and they'll run there, or they can be a part of that conversation of, oh, where is Shoemaker? No, you're going the wrong way, that kind of stuff. But yeah, definitely try to get outside of that box and make sure it's accessible.
One of the alcohol going the shop question,
Mm-hmm.
question program. When you were saying that 55% do this and 75%, were those like how did you kind of?
How did I count them?
That criteria?
It's really technical. It's difficult. I don't know if everybody can do it, but I had a piece of paper on the wall. Over pour, under pour, on the mark. And my staff put a tally mark every time. That's really it. That's really all it was. Actually, I think I have 3 buildings, so we did 3 different times. So one had it on the wall, 2 had it on the table, and they just tally marked it. One got super extra and counted how many times, like, made beer, liquor, and wine categories. So I knew how, like, they were more likely to overpour a wine glass than a beer cup. Like, it's really interesting. So you can break it down however you want, but it's really not that technical. Again, you don't have to have all these fancy things. We had a piece of paper and a pen. That's what we did. Good question. Anybody else? Phenomenal. Again, thank you guys so much for coming, and we ended on time.